June 7, 1944. The fields of Normandy still burned from the invasion the day before. Smoke rose from shattered hedgerows, where blackened Sherman hulls lay half-buried in mud and blood. German tank crews from the 12th SS Panzer Division watched through binoculars as American armor advanced across open farmland. And they laughed. The laughter echoed inside steel beasts painted with the black cross of the Wehrmacht, their 88mm guns already primed. To them, these Shermans were toys, undergunned, under-armored, and slow. But that morning, the laughter would fade into radio static, drowned by a sound the Germans hadn't yet learned to fear, the relentless hum of hundreds of engines moving as one. Bundesarchiv, June 1944. Through the thin Normandy mist, U.S. tankers advanced in waves. "Keep moving, keep spread," shouted Lieutenant Harold Price over the radio as his M4 Sherman jolted forward, treads grinding the soft earth. Behind him, more tanks rolled through the bocage, a patchwork of ancient hedges that turned every field into a deadly ambush trap. German Panthers and Tigers waited beyond the next ridge. Their guns fired. One shell tore through the first Sherman, igniting its ammo rack in a flash of orange. "Hit! Sherman burning!" crackled a German gunner. Yet the Americans didn't stop. They didn't retreat. They swarmed. U.S. Army After Action Report, June 1944. The German commander, Hauptmann Ernst Kruger, had seen the Shermans before in Italy. He knew their weaknesses. A 75mm gun that couldn't pierce his Panther's front armor, paper-thin plating vulnerable to even the smallest anti-tank shell. But something was different here in Normandy. The Shermans came not in dozens, but in hundreds. From hedgerow to hedgerow more appeared, flanking, surrounding, overwhelming. Their engines, once mocked, now filled the valleys like thunder. Wehrmacht Tactical Report, June 1944. The M4 Sherman, officially medium tank M4, had been built not for duels but for movement, for logistics. Each one weighed around 30 tons, carried a 75 meters M3 gun, and could reach 25 mph on road. It was no Panther, no Tiger, but it could be built in weeks, not months. In American factories, the Detroit Arsenal and Chrysler's tank division churned them out like clockwork, one every 30 minutes at peak capacity. U.S. Ordnance Depth Production Log 1943. For every Panther lost, the Reich could barely replace one. The U.S. replaced 5. That imbalance would become the story of Normandy itself. As American tankers pressed inland, they faced more than firepower. They faced disbelief. Sergeant Bill Patterson, 3rd Armored Division, recalled his first encounter. "The Tiger fired one cease, my buddy's tank went up like a torch. We didn't have time to mourn. We just kept coming." Veteran interview, 1946. What Germans didn't realize was that American doctrine had evolved. The Sherman wasn't meant to duel Tigers. It was part of a system. Artillery, infantry, air power, and coordination through the one weapon the Germans had underestimated: radio. Signal Corps Field Note, 1944. By D-Day +2 near Villers-Bocage, British and American units began coordinating tank pushes supported by airstrikes. P-47. Thunderbolts roared overhead, their 50-caliber guns ripping into German armor columns trying to counterattack. The Luftwaffe was nearly absent. Every Sherman crew knew that when they saw white smoke markers, friendly planes weren't far behind. The Shermans called the sky, one German tanker later admitted in disbelief. Bundesarchiv Interrogation Report, 1945. But coordination came at a cost. For every Tiger destroyed, 5 Shermans might burn. Tank crews lived fast, died faster. Inside the cramped steel box, heat suffocated. The engine roared like a furnace, and every second could end in fire. They called it the Ronson, lights every time. Yet those same crews refused to yield. Replacement tanks rolled in daily from the beachheads. The Germans, watching through periscopes, began to realize something terrible. These tanks were endless. U.S. Armored Corps Casualty Summary, June 1944. Behind the front lines, engineers and mechanics worked night and day. Field depots in Normandy were turning battle-scarred hulks into fighting machines again. A damaged Sherman could be patched, rearmed, and sent back in 24 hours. In contrast, a Panther might take weeks to repair, if parts could even reach it through Allied bombing raids. The German supply chain was breaking. The American machine was accelerating. Allied Logistics Command Report, 1944. And yet, even as numbers grew, German morale hardened. They still had faith in their steel. "They are ants," said one dramatized composite from Panzer Lehr division. "We crush them, but they keep coming." Always more. Captured Field Journal, June 1944. But ants can bury a lion. For every tank the Germans killed, more appeared from the fog, coordinated through efficient command nets, mobile repair, and sheer industrial willpower. American officers no longer sought tank duels. They fought as a network. A swarm, not a spear. June 10th, near St. Lo, the balance tipped. The Americans executed a coordinated armored thrust across 5 sectors. Shermans advanced behind artillery smoke, while engineers blasted open hedgerows with explosives. German tank commanders were trapped in confusion. Radio chatter screamed with reports of movement on every flank. Panthers fired blindly, their vision obscured by hedgerows and smoke. When they repositioned, artillery zeroed them in. The Shermans pressed through like waves against a cliff. U.S. Army Operational Log, June 1944. Even in defeat, German crews held on to pride. "We destroyed them by the dozens," recalled dramatized composite gunner Otto Meyer, but they never stopped. There was always another one coming from the road, from the field, from behind the smoke. Bundesarchiv Memoir, 1950. The battlefield had turned from a duel into a storm. The Shermans didn't need to be stronger. They needed to be everywhere at once, and they were. As dusk fell on Normandy's 7th day, the laughter of the German tank crews had gone silent. The fields they once mocked were now littered with burnt wrecks, some theirs, some the enemy's. But the tide was clear. The Shermans kept moving. At night, under flickering flares, rows of tanks advanced past destroyed villages, their engines low and steady, like a heartbeat that wouldn't stop. U.S. Signal Corps Photo Archive, June 1944. And yet, deep in Berlin, reports arriving from the Western Front didn't make sense. How could these inferior machines push elite Panzer divisions backward? How could they lose every duel yet win every day? German analysts debated whether it was luck, numbers, or something deeper. But within weeks they would learn the truth, that behind those inferior Shermans lay an invisible advantage that no amount of armor could stop. Oberkommando des Heeres Analysis, June 1944. That advantage wasn't just steel. It was something built months before D-Day, in factories and laboratories across the Atlantic. Something invisible, humming, and unstoppable. And as the Americans pushed deeper into France, the true weapon of their armored swarms was about to reveal itself. The secret wasn't armor. It wasn't the 75mm gun. It was connection. Inside every M4 Sherman, tucked beneath its steel floor, a compact olive-green box buzzed quietly, the SCR 508 radio. It was small, reliable, and unlike anything most German crews had ever faced. Where Panzers relied on flag signals or shouted commands through open hatches, every Sherman could talk, to its squad, to artillery, to aircraft. The Americans weren't a collection of tanks. They were a living network of steel and voices. Signal Corps Technical Manual TM 11600. 43. Back in 1941, engineers at the Galvin Manufacturing Corporation, later known as Motorola, had refined this innovation under government contract. Chief designer Daniel E. Noble and his team miniaturized frequency modulation technology, allowing clear transmission through static, dust, and explosions. It worked where older amplitude modulation systems failed. You could hear a man through gunfire, Noble would later recall. And that changed everything. Motorola Engineering Report, 1943. Each Sherman carried both transmitter and receiver, powered by a 12-volt dynamotor. The system ran on a 27.9 Hz band, giving it an effective range of up to 5 miles under combat conditions. That might seem trivial, but in the chaos of armored warfare, sir, where seconds meant life or death, it meant coordination, speed, and adaptability. U.S. Armored School Field Note, 1944. When the 3rd Armored Division pushed near St. Lo, their battalion commander could direct artillery and infantry from inside his tank, calling airstrikes and repositioning flanking units in real time. German officers couldn't believe what they were hearing. Literally, they were deaf to the enemy's coordination. It was as if the Americans had one mind, reported a captured officer of Panzer Lehr. Allied Interrogation Summary, July 1944. This invisible web was tested brutally on June 13, 1944, Villers-Bocage. A rolling Norman town with stone walls and tight streets, it was where the myth of German armor supremacy met American persistence. Tiger ace Michael Whitman had destroyed dozens of Shermans and Cromwells in earlier campaigns. But now the enemy wasn't as disorganized as before. Shermans maneuvered in sections, 3 tank teams communicating constantly. When one tank was hit, the others flanked, relayed positions, and called supporting fire from M10 tank destroyers stationed half a mile away. After-action report, 7th Armored Division, June 1944. The SCR-508 wasn't the only edge. American field repair units, backed by Detroit and General Electric's logistics design, turned radio coordination into logistical velocity. Every disabled Sherman had a precise location transmitted through divisional command. Recovery vehicles, M32s, would arrive within hours. German wrecks, by contrast, often sat abandoned, their positions unknown or unreachable. Bureau of Ordnance Maintenance Circular 1944. Technicians in Normandy developed a rhythm. They worked through the night, guided by headlights shaded red. They replaced engines, patched armor, retuned radios damaged by shockwaves. Many were civilians just months before, machinists from Illinois, mechanics from Pennsylvania. Without them, the swarm would have stopped. Army Service Forces Bulletin, June 1944. But the true moment when the swarm's power became undeniable came at St. Lo. July 1944, Operation Cobra. After weeks bogged down in the bocage, the U.S. First Army unleashed its coordinated fury. Over 2,500 bombers softened the German line. Then, as the dust settled, radio orders crackled across hundreds of Shermans. Go! Engines ignited like a chorus of thunder. Units rolled forward in perfect timing, exploiting every gap the bombers left behind. U.S. Army Operational Record, July 1944. German commanders tried to respond, but their radios, when they worked, were often limited to platoon leaders only. Lower crews had no voice. Orders lagged by minutes, sometimes hours. Panthers were forced into reaction, rather than initiative. They moved like a tide, wrote dramatized composite Hauptmann Kruger. Before we could aim, they were already behind us. Bundesarchiv Field Memoir, 1945. American radio crews learned to call not just to each other, but to the sky. P-47s and P-51s, flying in close air support, received real-time coordinates. Within minutes, the whine of aircraft engines cut through the smoke. Targets marked, Grid 27C, request immediate strike, a tanker would call. Rockets screamed down, tearing open hedgerows and scattering hidden German guns. This talking armor doctrine fused air, land, and logistics into one synchronized killing machine. U.S. Tactical Air Force Coordination Log, July 1944, and yet coordination alone wasn't enough. The Sherman still died by the hundreds. Crews adapted, learning to flank, to move in wolf packs, to let their radios guide them through the fog. You couldn't outgun a tiger, said Sergeant John Keller of the 2nd Armored Division. But you could outthink him. Veteran Oral History, 1947. Even the Germans began to acknowledge the shift. Reports from the Panzer Lehr Division described enemy armored units operating with unusual cohesion, supported immediately by artillery and air elements. Wehrmacht Tactical Bulletin, July 1944. Their own communications were often jammed or intercepted. American field signal companies, using mobile SCR-299 sets, triangulated enemy transmissions and fed data directly to artillery. The swarm could now see and hear beyond its immediate battlefield. Meanwhile, American factories back home mirrored this network mentality. At the Chrysler Tank Arsenal in Detroit, assembly lines worked like clockwork. Over 25,000 Shermans rolled off production between 1942 and 1945, their components interchangeable by design. Every bolt was standardized, recalled engineer Clarence Avery. Apart from Michigan, fit one from Ohio. No delay. No confusion. War Production Board Report, 1944. Each Sherman was not just a tank, but a node in an industrial organism stretching from Normandy's hedgerows to America's heartland. By late July, as the Allies broke out of St. Lo and surged toward Avranches, the Germans began losing control of the operational tempo. They had faster tanks, thicker armor, longer guns, but none of it mattered if they couldn't keep up. The Shermans didn't need to win duels. They won the war of movement. They are everywhere, noted dramatized composite Feldwebel Dietrich in a shaken diary entry. They move faster than we can think. Recovered journal fragment. August 1944. The technical edge of the SCR 508 was invisible, but it reshaped the battlefield more than any cannon could. Its circuits hummed in the dark, carrying orders, warnings, and desperate calls for help. Its antennae rose like reeds over steel backs, whispering in static. Connection became the new armor. When the American spearhead finally punched through German lines near Coutances, 200 Shermans advanced in perfect sequence, guided entirely by radio. Infantry followed the paths they cleared, and the breakout into Brittany began. "It felt like the whole earth moved," one corporal said, and every tank was a heartbeat in the same body. First U.S. Army combat record, July 1944. The Wehrmacht analysts back in Paris compiled grim reports. The enemy armor demonstrates superior command coordination and operational tempo through radio integration. Losses inflicted are unsustainable. Oberkommando West Situation Report, July 1944. They didn't know it yet, but the concept they were witnessing would define the next century of warfare. In the days following Operation Cobra, the German front collapsed. Not from destruction, but from disconnection. Their tanks still fought bravely, their gunners still hit hard, but they were isolated, deaf, blind. The Sherman swarm, guided by the hum of radio waves, rolled forward, a moving storm of steel, smoke, and unity. And as the Americans advanced through the wreckage of Villers-Fossard, the question echoing across German command lines was no longer, "Why are their tanks so weak?" It was, "How do they always know where to strike?" Captured Panzer Regiment communication log, August 1944. The answer, as history would soon reveal, wasn't in armor or guns. It was in the invisible frequencies that connected men, machines, and missions into one unstoppable force. By August 1944, the plains of Normandy had become a graveyard of German armor. The once invincible Panthers and Tigers lay silent amid burning wheat and shattered villages, their hulks half buried in the earth they had tried to hold. Across the fields rolled an unending tide of Shermans, scratched, scorched, patched, yet alive. Their advance was no longer hesitant or chaotic. It was coordinated, rhythmic, alive with invisible signals and shared purpose. In just 8 weeks, the Wehrmacht's armored divisions had been broken not by superior guns, but by superior connection. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey 1946. The psychological effect was immense. German commanders, trained to fight decisive duels, now found themselves drowning in confusion. "The Americans are everywhere," reported dramatized composite Oberleutnant Franz Kepler. "We strike one flank and the next moment artillery finds us. It's as if they can hear our thoughts." Bundesarchiv Interrogation File 1945. That illusion of omniscience shattered morale faster than any shell. German tank crews began to distrust their radios, suspecting interception or deception. Panic became contagious. One isolated battalion's destruction echoed through the entire front because there was no network left to anchor them. Meanwhile, on the Allied side, unity grew into a doctrine. Each Sherman wasn't fighting alone. It was part of an orchestra. Infantry, engineers, artillery, and aircraft worked in synchronized cadence, each note guided by the hum of the SCR 508 and the higher command networks linking divisions. Historian Martin Blumenson later called it the birth of modern battlefield communication, war by wire and wave. European Theatre Research Division, 1951. Every American advance began the same way. Reconnaissance units radioing terrain grids, engineers clearing minefields, tank leaders assigning call signs. Red 1 to Red 6, Blue Lead to Blue Tail. Commands echoed through static and dust. When one tank was lost, another filled its slot seamlessly. The system absorbed casualties without collapsing. In the chaos of hedgerows, this discipline meant survival. Behind the front line, the backbone of the swarm, logistics, kept the arteries pumping. Radio coordination allowed convoys to reroute instantly. Ammunition columns avoided ambushes by listening to field reports broadcast in real time. In July alone, over 20,000 tons of fuel reached armored divisions in Normandy through ad hoc radio-controlled supply routes. Army Service Forces Statistical Digest, 1945. Engineers like Colonel G.A. Lincoln refined communication protocols for convoy spacing and coded frequency shifts, ensuring that even under bombardment, the lifeline never broke. For the soldiers inside the Shermans, the psychological effect of connection was profound. Isolation, the killer of courage, was replaced by the calm knowledge that someone was listening. "You could key that, Mike," remembered Gunner James R. Hardy, "and know you weren't alone in that hell. Somebody always answered." Veteran interview, 1946. This invisible companionship hardened morale. Even when flames licked through the turret, men stayed longer, fought harder, because they knew the swarm was still moving around them. The Germans noticed it too. Prisoner interrogations revealed disbelief. "Their courage is mechanical," said one captured Panzer grenadier. "It comes from their radios." Oberkommando des Heeres Psychological Analysis, 1945. In a sense, he was right. Connection had replaced bravado as the new source of strength. The Americans weren't fighting as individuals. They were fighting as one organism, industrial, electrical, relentless. By late August, the breakout had turned into a rout. Operation Cobra expanded into the Falaise Pocket, where encircled German forces faced annihilation. Shermans from the U.S. 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions advanced from the north, Canadians and Poles from the south sealing the trap. Through radio coordination, artillery fire converged with mathematical precision. Columns of fleeing German armor were obliterated on the roads near Chambois. In those final hours, many German tankers destroyed their own vehicles, their engines silent under Allied skies they could no longer contest. Combined Arms Analysis, August 1944. The victory wasn't without sacrifice. Over 500 Shermans were lost in Normandy. For every Tiger destroyed, 5 American tanks burned, but production and repair erased despair. Behind each loss stood a factory, a mechanic, a signalman. Inside the war rooms of General Eisenhower and Bradley, the communications reports told a bigger story. The experiment worked. The fusion of radio, mobility, and industrial scale had created a new kind of warfare, one that didn't rely on heroes but on systems. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force Report, 1945. As the Allies crossed the Seine and liberated Paris, the lessons of Normandy were already being written into doctrine. Radios became mandatory across every vehicle, from jeeps to half-tracks. Coordination drills were institutionalized. The U.S. Army Signal Corps expanded its training tenfold, shaping the post-war philosophy that would define modern command. C3, Command, Control, and Communication. U.S. Army Field Circular, 1946. The psychological aftershocks rippled far beyond the battlefield. In post-war interviews, many German officers admitted they had misunderstood the American strength. "We feared their numbers," said General Bielin, "but it was their speed and communication that killed us." U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. The swarm doctrine, born in Normandy's hedgerows, became the foundation for what would later evolve into network-centric warfare. During the Cold War, the same logic reappeared in new forms. From Korea's radio-coordinated armor strikes to Vietnam's command helicopters, and decades later, the GPS-linked tanks of Desert Storm all carried the same DNA, the idea that information, not armor, decides the future of war. Engineers like Noble, Avery, and the thousands of unnamed workers who wired those first Shermans had unknowingly rewritten the art of combat. Department of Defense Historical Review, 1991. Even today, modern armored brigades trace their lineage to those fields in Normandy. Each digital map, each encrypted frequency, each satellite uplink is an echo of that first swarm, of the Shermans rolling side by side, their antennas slicing through the French sky. In 1944, connection was a novelty. In 2025, it's doctrine. Yet beyond the technology, there remains the human element, the crews who climbed into those steel coffins knowing their odds. Many never returned, their names etched in marble walls and small-town monuments across America. They weren't laughing stocks. They were the backbone of an idea, that unity could defeat superiority. One dramatized composite survivor decades later would summarize it best as he stood before a rusted Sherman on a French hillside. "They had the Tigers," he said softly, "but we had each other." Veteran Commemoration Archive, Tears to the laughter of German tank crews on June 7, 1944, had long since vanished into history's smoke. What remained was the whisper of radio static, the heartbeat of a connected army. From that sound rose a truth that defined the modern battlefield. In war, the strongest tank is not the one with the thickest armor, but the one that never fights alone.